Hello everyone, thank you very much for being here with me. Today we discuss an important subject, which is the persistent unit configuration. For a JPA implementation we will use Hibernate. This is to answer some questions that I often get and to prove that it's both possible to have XML configurations and Java configurations. If you're watching the event live, by the way, thank you very much. You have a live chat there, so you can ask questions in the live chat and start discussions as usually. If you're watching the event recorded, you can still ask your questions in the comment section. And of course, I advise you follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter and subscribe to the YouTube channel in case you want to know more about what I'm doing and the things that I'm sharing. So with that being said, I'm gonna share my screen, and again, one of the frequent questions that I get, not only on YouTube but also on the other social media I use, is if the JPA playlist I have on my YouTube channel is still up to date. So people see sometimes that I use their persistence.xml file to create a persistent unit configuration, and they worry because many people know that generally we quit using XML for configurations. They worry that the material is not up to date. Today I will actually prove you that the JPA playlist I have on this channel is still at least 99% up to date. So that means that you have no worry, you can still learn JPA from that playlist, and it's exactly what you will need in both old or modern applications. We will create a couple of projects, and I will show you what is the configuration of a JPA project with XML file, and then we will try to configure it without an XML file, so just with Java configurations. And you will see that both of the ways are possible, and the only difference is how we create the entity manager factory. Let's actually start. I already see some questions, but I will try to answer them a little bit later so I don't get interrupted. And what should I say here? So my first project about JPA config. So JPA config 1 or E1, that should be my project. Let's name it like this. As you can see, I create a new project with my IntelliJ. I will choose Maven, Java 17, which is the latest long-term supported at the moment, and that should be it. And then the only dependencies I need, I will copy them because I don't want to lose time searching for them now, are the Hibernate, because I will use Hibernate as my JPA implementation. The MySQL connector, because I will use a MySQL database. I actually created a very simple database with a very simple table and a couple of records, as you can see. So I have a product table which only has 2 columns, an ID and the name, and that should be enough to prove that a simple query works. Because if a simple query works, you can actually understand that the configuration is also correct, because otherwise the query wouldn't work. So if a simple query works, any query works. Yeah, that's the idea. So I have Hibernate and I have MySQL, and I will need a data source, and I will use the Hikari data source, which is also considered to be probably the most used connection pool data source today, and is the convention in any Spring Boot project. I'm not using now a Spring project because I want to strictly focus on the today's subject, which is how to configure Hibernate or any JPA implementation via either XML or Java. So let's start with XML, as I said. So that means I'm sure we'll go here, and then I will just create say an org example package to have a main package, and in the main package we can create a main class. In the main class we will have the main method, and here's where I would like to have an entity manager factory. Okay, but to have an entity manager factory, I need to have a persistent unit, and that's where the configuration of the persistent unit comes in place, meaning that we need to either create it with an XML file or create it via a Java configuration class. I will start by using a persistence.xml file. So look how it happens. This is basically the way in which you will see it created in most of the projects in my JPA playlist. You create a persistence XML file. I hope I write it correctly, because if I misplace the name, then it will not be found. So you have to be very careful. Should be in the class method. That's why I put it in the resources folder. Should be in a meta-inf folder, and then it should be named persistence XML. And if I don't write something correctly, then it will not be found and used by my project. And then this is basically, I'm just copy pasting it, because guys, I will never, trust me, I will never memorize this by heart. It doesn't make sense. So I just prepared it on my second screen, and as you can see, this is how the configuration looks like. So to define a persistence unit, you have the parent persistence, and then you have the persistence unit tag. You can see it here. It should at least have a name. So this is the name of the persistent unit. This is a mandatory. Then you can have any kind of description here. It's irrelevant. You need to have the provider class, which is basically kind of the main starting class of the dependency you are using. It's a must to define it, because depending on the JPA implementation you use, the class will be different. As you can see here, I use a class that is Hibernate specific. If I would have, for example, used Eclipse Link, which is a different JPA implementation, then this class would have been a different one, would have been the class specific to that JPA implementation I'm using. And then you have at least the properties representing the database connections. So you can see here I'm using MySQL, so I'm using the MySQL driver, and then I have my database on localhost. The name is demo. You can check it here, demo. And then I will use the product table and my credentials, which on my local system for demonstration purposes I usually always use root without a password. Never do that in a real world application. Now the only thing I need is I'm going here and I will add an entities package, and you know that if I'm using a JPA implementation, one of the main things is mapping the entities defined by the database tables as classes using normal entities. So that's where I'm going. I say product because that's the name of my table, product, and it should have two fields, ID and name. So I'm going here, product class, and then I say entity, and then the name of the class is the same as the name of the table. Okay, and that's basically it means I don't have to use the table name, and I have two columns. So private int ID, private string name ID, and I don't actually, the name is the same, so I don't need to use the column annotation. I just need to use getters and setters. And as you can see, because I'm using the latest versions of Hibernate, is the standard used is no longer Java Persistence API, but it's Jakarta Persistence API. It's just a change in the name. So it's very possible, I don't remember precisely, but it's very possible if you watch the JPA playlist, you will see the package names are different. They start with Java, not with Jakarta. But this is the only change. So it's the only change in the package name that came with outsourcing Java EE in 2019, when it was open source to, I guess, Eclipse Foundation, if I correctly remember. So then they had to change the name from Java to Jakarta because Java was registered by Oracle, so you couldn't use that anymore. But again, that's all a technical change. It's very small. It doesn't affect you. So again, the only changes, because I want to answer the question, is my JPA playlist on the YouTube channel still update? Yes, it's 99% update. What's missing is probably the package name Java into Jakarta, and it's still using persistence.xml, while maybe today most of the applications use a programmatic approach for defining the persistence unit, and that's basically it. And okay, this is my entity, and now it should be very simple. So if I'm using a persistence.xml, I should just say entity manager factory persistence create, then you just give the name is the one you gave it here, we copy it, we put it here, semicolon, and then from entity manager factory you can create an entity manager, as you might know, and then you can we will just prove very quickly that we can run a query. So most in general I should also close the entity manager, but that's not very important now. So create query, select p from product p, okay, and then usually you should use a typed query to be easier. So let's use a typed query. That means we should specify the type here, and then you will have a typed query of product query. I don't have parameters, so I just say get result list. I end up with a result list, and then I probably list for each product system out it in the console. And if I want to do something like this, most likely sorry, not sort, system out it, system out. And if I want to do this and see something that's a little bit nicer, let's just override it to string and display the ID and the name. So if I didn't mess up anything, because I was quite fast and I tried not to lose a lot of time into this simple project, my project should now run compile and then display the couple of products I have here. So you see a beer and the chocolate. That's what we should see in the console, and that proves the today first step that this works correctly. So for that's funny, because it's actually, it doesn't find the my persistent unit in the class path. So this is strange, because persistent. So I can run it again, and then see that's working, hopefully. Cool, it has been found and it's running, and most likely we should see that in the console very quickly. Okay, the products, fine, proved, first step proved. Let me now answer your questions if I know how to answer them. So I have a query regarding the DB connection. Do we need to close the entity manager for to release the connection to the pool? Yes, that's a must. So at the very end, in a real world app, you should always close the entity manager, and that should be on a finally. So of course, what I wrote here, this is not right in terms of how it should look like, because it's just a demonstration of the configuration. But this is at the minimum what you should do is close in the end the entity manager, and yeah, if you directly use the entity manager, then it's of course likely here you'll also like to check for the null. Anyway, so don't take this example as how you should write it in practice, because my purpose here is focus only on the configuration to prove you how to configure your persistence XML, your entity manager factory using a persistence XML file or Java configurations. But yes, always you should close the entity manager, because the JPA implementation are based on the context, and you should always have the minimum context, one context per use case. If you don't close the context, then you don't release the instances. So it's not only about the connection, it's also about the instances that you put in the context. The context would grow, and then you would get an out of memory error. So yes, you should also close the entity manager. Can you tell good resources to learn about Spring Data, JPA, and Hibernate? Yes, I have a book actually. I don't recall the name, but I think I recommend it in another video that you will find on this channel, where I recommend some books for developers. It's not a book that is very new. It's an older book, but I found it to be excellent for learning for learning Hibernate and JPA in general, actually. Can you use data source here? Yes, we will immediately use a data source. I didn't configure a custom one here, but in the next project I will do that. How excited are you for Spring Boot 3? Very excited. I want to use it probably as soon as it goes live with a general available. I will use it also in my production applications, but that will come later with another video because it's a specific different topic. S is missing in the file name. Yes, we have seen, and we had with this occasion the possibility to see what happens if you screw up with the file name and you see that it's not working. Can you tell how the manager gets the connection when we use container managed connection pool? That's a different topic. Let's take it in another video, because now, of course, if you went here, I should see somewhere. Did I miss it? Yeah, I think in my page it's missing, but you can define how the type of the transaction here. It could be JTA. You can see JTA or resource local, and by default it's resource local, so what you didn't see here. And the JTA is when you use an application server like Glassfish or WebSphere or WebLogic. It's what we've been doing usually with older applications. And that's what you should do in case you use an entity manager with the connection pool from an application server. But since I don't have now a setup and not either an application server downloaded, I will not be able to prove you more than this. But generally what's different is that you should use JTA and not the resource local, and make the configuration eat the connections from the connection pool managed by the application server. So that's very shortly an answer to your question. Cool. With that being said, this is the first one. Let's prove the second one. So I promised you this will not be a very long video. It should be actually no more than about 30 minutes in total. We will be able to prove both kinds of configurations. We are already at the second example. So the second example, still a Maven project, still Java 17. Doesn't really matter if it's Java 17 or something else. And of course, just to prove you, I will copy paste from the pom.xml file. I will copy paste the same dependencies, because I want to show you that I'm literally using the same dependencies. So it's not like I'm creating a different project. The only thing that will be different is the way I configure the persistence unit, because in the second project I don't want to add the persistence.xml file anymore. I want everything to be a Java configuration. So I can literally prove you just going here, copying, and then going to the project 2 and pasting the same code. Just that, because we don't have a persistence.xml file, you will not be able to use the persistence class anymore. So I'm reloading the project to take all the classes. I'm downloading the dependencies. Now I have them, but this is not the way we can create the entity manager factory anymore. So this line will be needed to be changed very soon. Okay. And before changing the line, let's give it a configuration. So I'm creating a config, and then how should I actually name this? Let's say I'm demo persistence unit. Is just enough for us in our demonstration. And then I should implement the persistence unit info interface, which has a lot of methods. I don't really like this interface, the way it's have been created, but in the end it's not that difficult to understand, so it's fine enough. Let's say it's fine enough. So you will just have to implement these methods, provide the minimum you need to create a connection. You can provide all the details, but you need at least the minimum. So persistence unit name, is it part of the minimum? Yes, of course it is. If you want, we can just use the same name. So I will this way make a comparison between persistence.xml file and the Java configuration. So you see, now the name of the persistent unit, instead of being in the XML file, it will be in the class. Persistent provider class name, same. instead of being in the persistence.xml file, it should be now in the class. Transaction type, instead of being the JTA or resource local, instead of being in the XML file, it will be in the class. And then what else do we need? At least the connection that should be. So I'm not using JTA, I'm using resource local, so I'm using the non-JTA, so this will remain null. This is the data source you would need to configure if you are using an application server, but since I'm not using an application server, I will have to override this method. So I'm creating a Hikari data source, and of course I need to return it. I set the JDBC URL. I set need, at least in this case, the class names. In case of using the persistence.xml file, automatically all the packages will be scanned. If you set something like exclude unlisted classes false, but in our case we should specifically provide the class names in a list. So I only have an entity, and that should be list of, and then you have to use the fully qualified name. So you have to use the fully qualified name. That's product, okay. And of course in a real world application probably you would use reflection to get the classes, so I guess you will not ever just list them like this, so manually, as I'm doing here, hard coded. This is not right. It's only for our demonstration because we don't want to lose a lot of time. But in a real world application, like for example Spring is doing, it's basically using reflection to parse the packages and find out which are the names. Validation, other properties, class loaders, that's the minimum. So of course you can configure other things as well. I'm not going to get into all the details because it's part of learning JPA more than and Hibernate more than our discussion. But I think with this configuration should be a minimum that we need, and that I can now finally change and take the entity manager factory in a different way. So we will create a persistence unit info descriptor, new persistence unit info descriptor based on our persistent unit, okay. And then using the persistent unit info descriptor, we should be able to create the entity manager factory using the entity manager factory builder implementation. Okay, very strange. Builder implementation actually, but I would have expected my IntelliJ find it already. So maybe I can try something like new entity manager builder. Now it finds it. Very interesting. very strange. And then based on the persistent unit info descriptor, and you can give some configurations. I will just provide an empty map for this, and then build, and that's basically the entity manager factory, and that's it. So now instead of having, you see I don't have any persistence.xml file. All my configurations are simply defined by an instance of a class. Normally these should not be hard-coded. They would come from somewhere, from some configuration file, maybe from the database and so on and so forth, or configuration file, because database is strange. Otherwise it means you'd have to connect to the database before connecting to the database, so it's not really a case, but at least a configuration file. And if we run this example, then it should literally do the same thing as the previous example. In this second E2 project, how is this different from JPA? We are still using JPA, so I'm not using two different things. I'm using the same Hibernate, which is a JPA implementation, in both first and second project. Okay, so I'm using the same dependencies in POM.xml. So please take a look here. I copy pasted them. I'm using the same things, same technologies. So in both projects, I'm using Hibernate, which is a JPA implementation. Jakarta Persistence API is a specification. The only thing I'm doing differently, and that's what I'm proving here in this demonstration, is that in the first project, the creation of the entity manager factory is done via a persistence.xml file, and in the second one, the creation of the entity manager factory is done via Java code directly. I don't have an XML file anymore. But the rest of the code, so you have the entity manager factory, the rest of the code is identical. So the only thing I'm proving here is the two different ways in which you can create the entity manager factory. You either use an XML file or you use Java code. But the rest of the usage of these dependencies is identical. So you don't have to think it's something different, okay? And of course, I'm having an issue, it seems, for some reason, because entity manager factory is null. So I did something wrong in the end in my configuration, most likely. We can check it again. So my persistence unit, provider resource local, that should not invoke the JTA. As I see, using JTA implement is very strange because I configure the non-JTA data source, blah 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 blah. So I'm not really sure what exactly did I do wrong here, because it seems that my configuration looks right. Probably I did something wrong. Usually it's something wrong when something's not working, especially here, because I see it's very strange. It tries to use JTA in spite of fact that I specifically stated I'm using resource local, and I specifically stated I'm using a non-JTA data source. So maybe it's kind of a configuration that I'm missing here, which should not be, but anyway. But either way, this is basically the way it should work. So if I'm if I'm running it now, it should do correctly the query. I will have to figure out why is this happening, because it's not really something normal. But anyway, you trust me. Normally this is working, and it should actually work in a normal way. So I'm not sure why it's trying to use JTA here, but we will figure out, and I will write it in a comment afterwards. So anyway, this is basically what I wanted to show you today, actually. So when you see Spring Boot, for example, just take Spring Boot as an example, that's not using the persistence.xml file. You see there's when you create a Spring Data JPA project, you will see nowhere persistence.xml file, and then you will just try to think, well, where is that persistence.xml file? Because if you learn JPA from my playlist, you will see that all the projects have a persistence.xml file, and maybe this is confusing for you. You will ask, well, how does Spring Boot do it without having a persistence.xml file? And the answer is quite simple. It's actually not using a persistence.xml file, but it's using a Java definition of the persistence unit, which you do it basically this way. So you just have to implement this interface and then define the configuration. While in the case of my projects, I simply use the persistence.xml file because it was very easy to copy the file and use it. But it's not a difference in anything that follows. So this is only a difference in how you create the entity manager factory. Anything that's related to Hibernate and JPA is identical. So that playlist is still up to date. No, don't worry that you see me using an XML configuration that's only for the Entity Manager factory. Okay, everything that follows, it's still up to date, so you can learn it without any stress that you are learning something deprecated. Okay, cool. With that being said, guys, I will figure out after the video, because I don't want to keep you now more, why this is probably a very simple configuration, why it's not working. I'm missing something here, but it's I promise you this is actually the way you do it. And I will upload the project on my GitHub as usual, and you will have the link in the description and in the comments of this video, and then you can try this yourself, so you can see yourself that this is working fine. With that being said, thank you very much everyone for being here with me. I hope you learned something valuable from this video. I hope you will follow me to learn some more things later with other videos that I will share. Until next time we meet, have an excellent time for learning. I'm waving goodbye. Cheers, guys, and see you next time.